the first thing you hear is not a cry. It is silence. A held silence, the kind that stretches across every person in the group, that makes the air feel solid and still. It has been happening for hours, and nothing about it feels routine. For the last 100,000 years, and long before that, this was the most dangerous thing your species did. More dangerous than hunting. More dangerous than predators. More dangerous than drought or starvation or the cold. Having a baby. This is a fact that tends to surprise people. We think of birth as natural. We think of it as something the body simply knows how to do. And in most mammals, that is exactly right. A horse foal stands within an hour. A chimpanzee mother gives birth quietly, usually alone at night, and holds her infant upright almost immediately. There is no assistance. No gathered group of waiting females. Just the mother, and then, very quickly, the baby. Human birth is nothing like that. And understanding why tells you something profound about what you are. Let's start with the body. Walk upright for a few million years, and the pelvis changes shape. It tilts, it narrows, it repositions itself to support the weight of a vertical spine. The result is a birth canal that is narrower and more mechanically complex than in any of your primate relatives. Meanwhile, the human skull, which houses the largest brain relative to body size of any primate, did not stop growing. So you have, at the very center of human reproduction, a fundamental mechanical problem. A very large head trying to pass through a very narrow and angular passage. Karen Rosenberg, an anthropologist at the University of Delaware, and Wynda Trevathan, a biological anthropologist who spent decades studying human birth from an evolutionary perspective, described this collision in precise terms. They called it the obstetric dilemma. In their landmark research, Rosenberg and Trevathan showed that human birth requires something no other primate birth requires: rotation. The baby enters the pelvis facing sideways, rotates a quarter turn at the midpoint, then rotates again to exit facing downward. This complex spiral movement was not designed. It evolved as a partial solution to an extremely tight fit. And here is the detail that changes everything. The baby exits facing away from the mother. In every other primate, the infant emerges facing toward the mother, which means she can reach down, guide it, pull it gently upward, clear its airway herself. In humans, the baby faces backward. If a mother tries to guide a human infant herself during a difficult delivery, she risks bending the infant's spine the wrong way. She risks injury. She risks death, for the baby, for herself, or for both. Rosenberg and Trevathan argued that this anatomical reality has a profound evolutionary consequence. Human birth, almost by biological necessity, requires assistance. Not because ancient women were weaker than their primate cousins, but because the architecture of the human body, the gift of a large brain and upright posture, made solitary birth genuinely more dangerous than attended birth. The women who survived, and whose infants survived, were the women who had others with them. So let's reconstruct a scene. It is roughly 100,000 years ago. You are somewhere in what is now East Africa, part of a band of perhaps 25 to 30 people camped near a river. It is late afternoon, and the mood has been tense since before sunrise. One of the women in your group went into labor in the dark hours of the morning. She is strong. She has done this before. But this labor is longer than the last, and the older women, 3 of them, have not left her side. One presses cool damp leaves to her forehead. One grips her hand through each contraction. One crouches low, watching, waiting, positioned to receive. There is no bed, no horizontal surface. The laboring woman is upright, held from behind by one of her companions in a supported squat, a position that uses gravity, that opens the pelvis, that the body moves toward naturally when it is not being directed otherwise. In research published in American Scientist, Rosenberg and Trevathan noted that upright and semi-reclined birth positions appear across all documented hunter-gatherer cultures, and that the flat-on-the-back position common in modern hospitals is largely a product of medical convention, not anatomy. The oldest woman in the group, she is perhaps 42, and that makes her one of the most experienced people anyone here has ever known, has seen 9 births. She has also seen 3 that did not end with a living child, and 2 that ended without a living mother. She carries that knowledge the way she carries the knowledge of which plants stop bleeding. It was given to her. She will give it to someone younger before she is gone. This is what Wenda Trevathan argues most directly in her book Human Birth, An Evolutionary Perspective. Midwifery, the practice of an experienced attendant assisting another person through labor, is not a recent cultural invention. It is ancient. It may be one of the oldest forms of specialized knowledge your species ever developed. In every culture anthropologists have documented, including isolated foraging groups with no contact with the modern world, birth is attended by experienced others. It is almost never a solitary event. That pattern is too consistent across too many separate cultures to be coincidence. It is a biological echo. The baby is born just before sunset. It is wet and startlingly loud and, by the standards of any other mammal, almost shockingly unfinished. Human newborns cannot walk, cannot cling, cannot regulate their own body temperature, cannot feed themselves without help latching. They can barely hold their own heads up. Compare this to a newborn chimpanzee, who grips its mother's fur independently within hours, whose eyes focus almost immediately, who begins coordinating its limbs that same day. A human newborn arrives looking like it came 3 months too early. In a biological sense, it did. Holly Dunsworth, an evolutionary biologist at the University of Rhode Island, challenged one version of the obstetric dilemma by pointing out that human gestation length is constrained not only by pelvic dimensions, but by the metabolic limits of the mother, by how much energy a pregnant body can sustain over time. The human baby is born when it is, in part, because continuing to grow inside the mother any longer would cost more calories than her body could supply. What emerges is not yet finished. It is a brain that will triple in size in the first year of life, developing at a pace that required it to begin outside the body because it could not complete the process inside. This has a consequence that echoes for years. The infant born beside that river needed someone to carry it constantly for the first several months. It needed night feeding every few hours. It needed warmth when it could not generate its own. It needed protection from predators and cold and infection. No single adult could have managed all of this while also hunting, gathering, building shelters, and moving camp. The math simply does not work for solo parenting. Across multiple early modern human sites, including Skull Cave in what is now Israel, where remains of early Homo sapiens dating to roughly 100,000 years ago have been carefully excavated, archaeologists have found evidence of deliberate infant burials, sometimes placed with intention and care, suggesting that even then, the loss of a child was recognized and mourned as loss. The infant mortality rate was high, not because people did not care. It was high because birth was genuinely dangerous, the newborn period was genuinely dangerous, and the resources required to sustain a completely helpless infant for months were extraordinary, even in a good year. What your ancestors built in response to all of this was not a system in any formal sense. It was something older. A grandmother who remembered. A birth attendant who had seen it go wrong and knew what to watch for. An older woman who took the baby when the mother could no longer stay awake. A group that slowed its movement after a birth, stayed near water, redistributed its tasks without being asked. Anthropologists call this alloparenting, the care of offspring by individuals who are not the biological parents. In humans, this behavior appears to be ancient, consistent, and deeply wired. The human child is not raised by two people. It never has been. It is sustained by a network of care that extends well beyond the mother, the father, the nuclear unit. That is not a social arrangement. It is an evolutionary fact. Your ancestors did not develop tight social bonds because they were sentimental. They developed them because birth, the physical reality of human birth, its difficulty and its aftermath, made those bonds structurally necessary for survival. Every human who has ever lived survived their first year because of a web of care that reached far beyond their parents. The woman by the river held her infant that evening with the older women still close. The baby's cries softened into something quieter. The fire was built larger than usual. No one moved far from camp that night. And the oldest woman, who had seen this 9 times before, watched for a while and then looked away, not with relief exactly, but with something close to it. The knowledge she carried had worked again. She would sleep, and in the morning she would begin, slowly and without ceremony, passing it on. The first thing you hear is not a cry. It is silence. That held, collective, aching silence. Every person in the group waiting together for the sound that means everything is going to be all right. You have heard that silence. You know exactly what it feels like to wait inside it. That is where you came from.